Let's dive into one of the biggest, most universal questions out there, one that every single one of us has to face. Why do we get old? I mean, why do our bodies slow down, break down, and eventually just stop? It's a process we all see happening, but the actual reasons behind it are way more fascinating and complex than you might think.
And to really get our heads around this, let's start with a fantastic question someone posted online. They were looking at their 14-year-old dog, getting gray, moving slower, and then they thought about a 14-year-old human, who's still basically a kid. They've got so much of the same biology, right? So why does one body wear out so much faster than the other? This simple, everyday observation just perfectly sets up the mystery we're going to unravel.
And that question right there tells you something really important. See, if aging was just simple wear and tear, like a car getting old and rusty, you'd expect things to break down at a pretty similar rate, but they absolutely don't. The real story, it turns out, is so much deeper than just things getting worn out from use.
So, when scientists try to crack this puzzle, they come at it from two different angles. First, you've got the evolutionary theories. These ask the really big picture question: why does aging even exist in the first place? And then you've got the mechanistic theories. These are all about the nuts and bolts. Okay, but how does the body physically break down? You really need both to see the full picture.
All right, so let's jump right into that first big question, the evolutionary why. I mean, think about it. Aging seems like a huge disadvantage, right? So why hasn't natural selection just gotten rid of it? Why is it this universal feature of, pretty much all life?
Well, the answer boils down to a fundamental truth about evolution. Natural selection is incredibly powerful for anything that helps you survive and have kids when you're young. But once you've passed on your genes, that evolutionary pressure, it just fades away. It's almost like after you've had kids, evolution kind of loses interest in what happens to you.
And this leads us to this really cool idea from back in 1957 called antagonistic pleiotropy. Okay, that's a mouthful, I know, but let's break it down. Pleiotropy just means that one single gene can do multiple things. And antagonistic? Well, that means those things can work against each other, being good for you at one point in your life and bad for you at another.
So here's the crucial trade-off. A gene that helps you grow faster, or makes you more fertile, or gives you a super strong immune system when you're young, that gene is going to be a huge winner, evolutionarily speaking. It gets passed on. But what if that exact same gene contributes to, say, cancer or chronic inflammation 50 years later? Evolution doesn't care, because the early benefit already happened. It's the ultimate biological bargain. Short-term gain for long-term pain.
Here's another way to think about it, called the disposable soma theory. Just imagine every living thing has a limited amount of energy. It has to budget that energy between two main jobs: making babies, that's reproduction, and repairing its own body, which scientists call the soma. And in the grand calculus of evolution, reproduction almost always wins that budget battle.
I mean, just look at it from a simple cost-benefit analysis. Why would evolution spend a massive amount of precious energy building a perfect 100-year repair system for a little mouse that has like a 99% chance of getting eaten by a hawk in its first year? It just wouldn't make sense. It's so much more efficient to pour all that energy into making more mice, fast. The body, in a sense, becomes disposable.
Okay, so that's the why. Evolution's main goal is just to get us to reproductive age, not to make us last forever. But that brings us to the second part of the story, the how. How exactly does the body slowly fall apart at the molecular level?
Our understanding here has come a long way. Early on, back in 1956, you had ideas like the free radical theory, which blamed one specific culprit, damage from oxygen molecules. But we now know the story is so much bigger. By 2013, scientists had mapped out what they called 9 hallmarks of aging, and just recently in 2023, that list was updated to 12.
And this is basically the modern map of aging. These 12 hallmarks are the core processes that drive the decline. We're talking about everything from our DNA getting damaged, to chronic inflammation, to our precious stem cells just getting exhausted. This is the how laid out in incredible detail, and it shows just how many different things are going wrong all at once.
We're not going to go through all 12, but let's just grab a few key examples to get a feel for it. You've got genomic instability. That's basically typos and errors building up in our DNA code. Then there's telomere attrition. Think of telomeres as the little plastic tips on your shoelaces, but for your chromosomes. Every time a cell divides, they get a little shorter, until they're gone. And then there's cellular senescence. This is where cells go into this weird zombie-like state. They stop dividing, but they don't die, and they just hang around spewing out junk that causes inflammation.
So we've covered the evolutionary why. this lack of pressure for our bodies to be perfect forever, and we've looked at the mechanistic how, all these specific ways our cells and tissues break down. Now for the really important part. How do these two giant ideas actually fit together?
This is where it all clicks into place. The best way to think about it is like a series of interconnected gears. The evolutionary why, that's the big picture. It's the reason the gears are allowed to turn in the first place. Because evolution didn't bother to build a perfect machine that never wears out, those smaller molecular gears of damage and decay are free to start spinning.
And it happens in a sequence, a kind of cascade. It all starts with those tiny, early molecular changes, like little mutations in your DNA. Then your body tries to respond. Your cells kick into gear with things like inflammation to try and clean up the mess. But eventually, after decades of this, the damage just overwhelms the repair systems. And that leads to the final stage, the stuff we actually see and feel as getting old.
So, putting this all together, the why and the how. It isn't just some academic exercise. It's completely changing how science and medicine are thinking about aging and what we can do about it.
At the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is this. Aging isn't some random mistake or a disease that we just happen to get. It's actually a deeply programmed consequence of that ancient evolutionary bargain that life made millions of years ago, a deal that prioritized short-term reproductive success over long-term survival.
And that leaves us with one last, really provocative question. If aging is just the result of a biological trade-off, and if we now understand the nuts and bolts, those gears of that trade-off, well, can we use science to renegotiate the terms of that deal? That single question is what's driving an entire new frontier of research, and it just might change what it means to grow old.